Hello and welcome back. In Chapter 4, we're going to discuss the emergence of thought and language, cognitive development and infancy to early adulthood. So, this chapter is going to talk a lot about Piaget's and Vygotsky's models. So, pay very close attention to the different from the different models and how they discuss and actually show a visual or show a visual of how development occurs. So according to Piaget, children understand the world through schemes, right? So psychological structures that organize experience. Infants group items based on what actions they can perform, like sucking, grasping, utilizing their hands. Preschoolers group by function or concepts, and older children and adolescents group by abstract categories. So assimilation is an experience or incorporated into an existing schema. Accommodation is that schemes are modified based on new experiences. So new experiences help us to accommodate things and whatnot because again our brain grows and stretches, but based on our experiences. So we see things through our experiences. If a child spends more time accommodating than assimilating, he or she uses equilibration. Right? Equilibration is outmoded ways of thinking with replacements replaced by different and more advanced ways of thinking. Right? Because again, experience helps you grow. Sometimes the best teacher can be outcomes. Right? Natural outcomes. So cognitive development, Piaget's model talks about the sensory motor, the sensory motor. It's the infancy, birth to 2 years, pre-operational, preschool and early elementary school years, concrete operational, middle and late elementary school years, and formal operational, adolescence to adulthood. So stage one of Piaget's theory is birth to age two. This is adapting to exploring the environment, understanding objects, and object permanence. And I'll show you some examples of this here in a minute here. So characteristics of the pre-operational thinking, right? Egocentrism. Child believes that all people see the world through what he or she does, right? Everything revolves around me. Centration. The child focuses on one aspect of a problem or situation but ignores other relevant aspects of things, right? Appearance as reality. The child assumes that object really is what it appears to be, right? So, for instance, let's talk about the type of conservation, right? Look at this first one where it says liquid quantity, right? You see those two glasses. Is there the same amount of water in each glass, right? If you were to pour those cups into different, even though it's the same glass, same amount of water or whatnot, if I was to pour them to objects that looked different or whatnot, and one was taller and one was wider or whatnot, um, some people will question, or in this stage will question, is that a bigger glass or a smaller glass based on the size of the glass and not based on the volume of the water, right? Like type of conservation also, right? We're talking about mass, right? Do each ball have the same amount of clay, right? You can see that those look like they have the same amount, right? Transformation, roll one ball so that it looks like a sausage, right? Now it looks like one is bigger and one is flatter, right? So now it looks as if that the amount of clay is different or whatnot, or one's bigger than the other. Some criticisms about Piaget's theory, right? It underestimates cognitive competence in infants and young children and overestimates competence in adults. Infants have a greater understanding of objects than Piaget's thought, right? Is vague with respect to process of change. It does not account for variability in performance. It undervalues the influence of social, emotional, environmental learning, right? Does children act as a scientist as believed by Piaget? Core knowledge hypothesis. Children are born with basic knowledge of the world and is elaborated on based on experiences. So children's first theories concern physics, biology, and psychology. So research shows that babies understand objects that at an earlier age than shown by Piaget, right? So, for instance, 4.5 months old shows some understanding of object permanence. 5 months old expect liquids to change shapes, right? A naive theory of physics is formed even by infants. By 12 to 15 months, toddlers understand several properties of animate objects. By age 4, several elements compose a naive theory of biology. For instance, growth, animate objects get bigger with time. Internal parts, human that has blood and bone, while a rock does not. Inheritance, living things resemble those that is genetically bonded with. Healing, their own hair will grow, right? But their baby doll's hair will not grow. Human thinking is based off mental hardware, mental and neural structures that are built in that allow the mind to operate. Mental software, mental programs that are basis for performing particular tasks, right? Our brain has different parts that have different jobs and different roles in processing information. So attention, let's talk about attention. How do babies live in cities sleep through the night with the sound of traffic? Right? Attention processes that determine which information is processed further by the individual or oriented response. And unfamiliar stimulus produces a change in heart rate and brain waves. So a stimulus that you're not familiar with, a stimulus that is strange or odd in your environment or whatnot, will change your heart rate and brain waves based off of it's not a familiar experience, right? Habituation, the process responds to a situation once it becomes familiar. So imitation. Infants are able to imitate adult facial expressions. Young children imitate behavior of others. Three important features of memory in young babies. Events from the past are remembered. Over time, events are no longer recalled. And cues prompt memories that seem to have been forgotten. Memory improves as development progresses. So let's talk about those parts of the brain I just discussed. The prefrontal cortex, where executive functioning is housed, right, where our decision making is. The hypothalamus, which talks to the thalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. Those are in the limbic region of our brain. The hippocampus is responsible for memory. The amygdala is responsible for aggression, fear, those type of things and whatnot. All those things are impacted by what we experience, right? So different parts of our brain are impacted by our experiences and whatnot and how we process information. For instance, if we look at memory, some of you guys are at different ages or whatnot. Could you remember the name of your second grade teacher? Can you have an autobiographical memory, people's memory of experienced events of their own lives? First developed in the preschool years. The result of basic memory skills that are developed in infancy, language skills, and sense of self. Sense of self lends coherence and continuity to experiences. In the case of child abuse, is children's testimony accurate? Preschoolers are suggestible. Leading questions are sometimes stored in false memories, often confused about who said or did what, right? So again, at the preschool age, they're very suggestible. Certain questions, the way you question them, the way you speak to them, and whatnot, can lead them to believe or to respond differently to certain questions. What might a 2-year-old counting sound like? By age 2, most children have some basic counting skills, right? 3 basic principles of counting. One-on-one principle. There's only one and only 2 numbers for each object counted. Stable order principle. The number of names are counted in the same order. The cardinality principle. The last number names differ from previous ones in the sequence by denoting the number of objects. Understanding of these principles is not always accurate, right? So there's some conventional consequences that go along with these principles. So as we're going to talk about the mind and culture, right? Talking about Vygotsky's theory. When his theory houses the zone of proximal development, talks about scaffolding, right? And the way youngsters learn new concepts and skills. So according to Vygotsky, children advance developmentally when they are aided by someone more skilled, right? There are 3 important contributions to his theory: the zone of proximal development, scaffolding, and private speech. You guys want to see that I put a video in the learning notes or whatnot that kind of talks more about his theory and these models and whatnot to give you guys some extra information. Teachers and parents can provide structure that a child needs to tackle a certain problem, right? Vygotsky's basic premise is cognition first development, develops in a social setting and only later comes under the child's independent control. As children progress, the teacher stops giving direction and begins only giving reminders, right? Remember, from kindergarten to third grade, a child is learning to read. From third grade on, a child is reading to learn, right? So again, teachers are first really teaching the concepts, and then they are actually reminding the concepts and whatnot to help bring home the learning, right? Parents also use scaffolding, right? Primarily verbal instruction in the U.S., but both verbal instruction and gestures in India and Guatemala. Private speech, comments that children give themselves to help regulate their own behavior. I'm trying to make sure I pronounce this word correctly. I'm gonna call it phon- I kill this word. Phonemes, unique sounds that can be used to create words. The building blocks of language. Infants can distinguish some of them at 1 month, right? So they can distinguish these at 1 month with their native language. 7 to 8 months old, pay attention to words that they have heard frequently. Infants recognize words in a couple of ways. Pay attention to stress syllables. Identify words at the beginning and at the end of sentences easier. Notice syllables that go faster frequently, right? And listen to infant directed speech. At 2 months, babies begin to coo or produce vowel sounds. Babbling, speech-like sounds with no meaning emerge after cooing. Becomes more elaborate as babies experience sounds, and they are precursors to real speech. Children begin to understand words before being at the age to produce them. Children have a vocabulary of a few hundred words at age 2. At age 6, there's more than 10,000 words. Fast mapping, a child's connection between words and references that are made so quickly that he or she cannot consider all possible meanings of the word, right? How do young children learn new words rapidly, right? Several factors involved. Joint attention is one, right? This is where the parent assists in labeling things and whatnot that the children can show interest in, right? So what a parent shows interest in, the child is actually going to have joint attention to as well. Constraints of word names. If an unfamiliar word is heard, along with objects that already have names and some that don't, the word refers to the object that don't have names. Children follow other rules to label the entire object, not just the one of its parts. Cognitive factors. Language becomes a means to achieve goals and relay intentions, right? Developmental changes in word learning. Before 18 months, children rely on simple attentional processes to name objects. At 24 months, they use language and social cues, right? How do bilingual children learn to speak two languages, right? They start off slowly at first. They mix sounds and words from both languages. Some learn to separate the languages and progresses at the same rate as a monolingual children, right? And they tend to have smaller vocabulary, and it leads into larger vocabulary. Children have different styles of learning language. A referential style, which vocabulary consists mostly of words that name people, objects, and actions. Expressive style, where vocabulary contains some names, but also social phrases like "I want it," right? Language is used as a social tool. Parent engages encourage language growth by speaking to their children often and naming objects of interest, like reading books or watching certain videos. Children can resist two-word sentences with basic formulas, like "Give me a cookie," "Tell me sleep," those kind of things. Sentences progresses 3 years old may have sentences of words 10 or more. English has a highly irregular grammar, right? Over regularizations, applying grammatical rules to words that are not exceptions to the rule. For instance, referring to two men as mans, I go home, or I go home. Those kind of things can, again, have an irregular grammar. According to linguistics, children are born with mechanisms that can guide and the learning of grammar, right? There's certain parts of the brain that specializes for language, right?